This is part two of this presentation. The first part seems to have worked okay. This is my friend Sid Goldberg from Gaia TV, and he's showing a bronze egg. The story behind this egg introduces the story of the presentation given at the StarworksUSA 2019 by Uri Geller. Sid Goldberg had gone to Israel to interview Uri Geller, and he asked me, he said, "What do you want to ask Uri Geller?" And I said, "Ask Uri Geller about the egg." The story that Uri tells is that he was given this egg by John Lennon just before John died in the late 1970s. And the story behind it is that John had a UFO sighting on top of the balcony up high on the Dakota Hotel condos with May Pang. And he later had another experience where the beings were in the room, and he was trying to wake up Yoko Ono. He couldn't wake her up. And the story he tells, and it's on his website, UriGeller.com, is that he was given this egg by these beings, and he met with Uri Geller and said to Uri Geller, "This may be my ticket to another planet, but I don't want it. You can have it." And he gave it to Uri Geller. Uri Geller has held this egg for many decades, says he never leaves his person, he always has it with him. And so I asked Sid Goldberg to ask him about this egg. So here's Sid Goldberg taking a photo of showing that he has asked Uri about the egg. I wrote him an email back to congratulate him and say, "Good boy, Sid, maybe your ticket to another planet." And as that happened, they were in a restaurant. As he was reading my email to Uri Geller, Uri pointed up at the ceiling, and the restaurant had begun to play Imagine by John Lennon. So Uri Geller is at the conference. He's on a Skype broadcast. And when I was in Boulder, Paola had talked about getting him on there, and that she had been talking to one of the remote viewing speakers about bringing Geller on there. And at that moment, her key to her car bent, and she blamed Uri Geller for this. It took her quite a while to straighten out the key to get it to go in the ignition. It would not fit in the ignition. And it's hard to see in this photo, but the key is still somewhat bent, but it's good enough that she can use it for her car. But strange things sort of centered around Uri during this conference, and his was probably the most popular lecture that was given there. Here he is on screen from Israel. On stage is Paola Harris, Sid Goldberg from Gaia TV, and Russell Targ. And Russell Targ had worked with Uri Geller in the 1970s at SRI. Targ was one of the people they were using for the CIA experiments, that he was a magician, and he knew all the tricks that magicians used. And they had done a bunch of experiments with Uri Geller, and now Russell Targ was back to lecture on remote viewing and also to help in this interview with Uri Geller. So Uri comes on the screen, and I'll show you just a little clip here, the videotape of his entire lecture where he gives targets, and he gives targets, he takes targets, and he also does this spoon thing I'm going to show you in a second. But that can be found online or purchased from the StarworksUSA conference. But here's Uri basically bending a spoon online and making one break.
Bend or melt the spoon, I'll break it. I focus my mind into the thin part of the spoon, and as you can see, I stroke it gently, and in my mind I say bend, and the minute I feel that it's beginning, I can feel it, it's softening, the metal is softening, and watch what's going to happen now. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, break, 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 there. The spoon simply broke in half. Now, you know, we are far away from each other, and you have to take my word that this is a real spoon. I've done this thousands of times under laboratory control conditions. The spoons just snap. Some spoons just bend. The moment that spoon broke on the BBC's telephone system blows up. Not because of my energies, but because hundreds of thousands of people were experiencing their spoons bending and breaking. It was an unbelievable phenomenon. Our pictures moved on the walls, clocks changed. It was a mass phenomenon. And then I just bend this a little for you. Sid, can you see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, watch, it's going. And it usually bends upwards. Look, and this will continue bending now for maybe another minute, still moving. So that answers your question. What
Uri was given a target to identify. He was stating he wasn't really getting the target. And at the end, he said, well, let me just sort of guess. So he picks off the color black. He said it's black. And he draws the item on the left-hand side with this sort of edge around it. And what the target was, they were looking for a target. And so Russell Targ is legally blind, and he carries a magnifying glass in his pocket that flips out of this little holder. And so he provided this magnifying glass, and Uri drew what he thought was the thing. And you'll see this little edge on it on the magnifying glass, which is similar to what he drew there. And at the end, it was kind of interesting because Uri said, it'll be measured. It'll be the same size as my piece of paper, what I've drawn on the piece of paper. So you could see Uri is there, and his wife comes, and they measure the thing that he had drawn on the paper, and it came to 6 centimeters. And they were waiting, and it took a couple of minutes, but somebody came up from the audience with a tape measure, and they measured the magnifying glass that Russell Targ provided, and it was 6 centimeters. It was exactly the same size as what Uri Geller had drawn on the paper. And the weird thing was, Uri had said, this is going to be the same size. Measure your item, and we'll compare it to the thing I've drawn. Around the edge, you can't really see it with this photo of Sid holding up the object, but I immediately identified that may have been the inside. So if you take, what it happens is you have the inside is going to be the glass with the edge around it, which would line up with Uri Geller's object. But it was only open for a second, and nobody really got to photograph it when the magnifying glass was out of its little pouch. This is a photograph that Sid Goldberg took on the stage while this was going on, and this there was quite a few people were participating in these things. And the interesting one that he did, I think it's the next slide here. Uri gives a target. He says, okay, I'm going to send a target, and I want everybody to think of a city in Europe. And what you have here is when it was over, they're asking how many people got the city. The city was Paris, and it was like 70 to 80% of the people in the room got that target. And the people that I talked to who didn't get the target thought it was London. And Uri had actually said, I was going to pick London, but then I decided I would pick Paris. So everybody that I talked to got either, like 80% of them got Paris, but the other people that I talked to all got London. And then last year we had the thing with the feathers, which was very bizarre. And then this year, Paula comes down on the Monday with a Paris shirt on. And if you know, I've given lectures about what happened, the weirdness last year at the StarworksUSA conference. That all had to do with feathers. That a friend of mine, Tony Bintz, had sort of an impression that he should come to America to meet with myself and Paola Harris. He believed there was communication going on with these objects that he was filming in his backyard, and asked for a sign, and had 4 different feathers on 4 different days fall at his feet. And then he was talking to his wife. And she didn't want him to go to America. He'd never left the United Kingdom. And he went out and he said, I need some help with my wife. If you want me to go to America, I need a sign. And a big 24-inch black feather floated over his head. He said, thank you. And then this feather shot off into the air. And then his wife realized, because he was taking photographs, that he wasn't totally crazy. So she works in London, England. And on the way to the train, she said, okay, if this is for real, I'd like to see a feather. And she has 4 incidents she has with feathers, where she starts asking for these feathers. And the most bizarre one of the 4 was she becomes frustrated and says, I don't want to see one feather fall in front of me. I want to see hundreds of feathers. And she gets off the train the same day at the station, and the door opens up and there's a bush with hundreds of feathers in it. So it was this very bizarre thing that sort of started. It came to, he came to Laughlin last year to the conference. There was 6 people that had feather incidents happen at that event. Feathers falling, feathers flying by the window, being attached together and going one way and then the other way. And then on the Monday last year, Paula comes down with this giant feather shirt on that she had brought in, had bought in Italy. So there's very bizarre synchronicity again, where Paula comes down on the Monday and she's got this Paris shirt on. Now here's Stacy Wright from the MUFON group in Phoenix. It's one of the 3 biggest UFO groups that I've lectured to in the United States. Is a huge group that she and her partner Jim had put together. The group had basically fallen apart to nothing, and she was one of the lecturers there, and her and Jim put this group together, which is one of the biggest in America now. And I will probably be lecturing there again next year. I've lectured there a couple of times. And what I will probably be talking about is a little bit of something that Stacy was talking about that sort of reminded me, and that has to do with the Phoenix Lights. The lecture I like to give, I've only given it once, and it was sort of blocked for copyright. It has to do with the theory of wow, where I state that I'm starting to see more and more patterns that whatever the intelligence is behind the UFO phenomenon, it seems to just simply want us to go wow. It wants us to get our attention, to do weird things and do events that catch our attention and make us realize that we may not have the whole answer to how reality works. One of the biggest wow events of all times was the Phoenix Light event. And the whole question is, I mean, if we are dealing with extraterrestrials, do they really need a craft that is whatever it was, a half mile or a mile across, flying 100 feet off the ground over southern Nevada and down through Arizona, and flying 100 or 200 feet over the ground above Phoenix, Arizona? That doesn't make any sense at all. That is basically looks like a very direct thing where tens of thousands of people saw this thing, and it's to catch everybody's attention, to make them realize the nuts and bolts idea of a random universe may not be correct. So that may be what I'll talk about. I'll go through, all the different events. So like crop circles are wow events. Taking a 9x11 heart out of a cow without any incision is a wow event. Bloodless mutilations are a wow event. They're to make you go, how the heck did they do this? And that leads into the whole lecture that I was giving in Boulder, Colorado, and in Laughlin, was the whole thing about aports, which I've only been in for a year, but I have so many stories that have been told to me. And now I'm starting to have these events happen myself that I can't even write these things down. I'm trying to write them into a book that's going to be called Weird, the Paranormal World of Manifestations and Aports. But in this weird book, I can't even keep up. There's just so many stories coming in from various people about these aport manifestation things associated with either ghosts or abduction experiences or physical mediumship, that it's very hard to keep up with these stories, and they're very, very weird. That's why I want to call the book Weird. So here is an event that occurred at Laughlin, kind of a weird event. We go there. This is when the conference is finished on the Sunday evening. We go in there for dinner, and I'm with Paul Sperry and Marianne Sperry and Paula's there, and my assistant Desta's there. There's two big tables of people there. And it was at that event that Paul Sperry had been watching the Russell Targ event, and Russell Targ had talked about what he calls the ESP tester, which is a computer app which you can put on your cell phone, and you can test your ESP abilities. And he had actually invented this at the time when Wernher von Braun, he was friends with Wernher von Braun, and Braun had tested this ESP tester, and apparently Wernher von Braun was very good at ESP. And so Russell Targ outlines the fact that it was actually Wernher von Braun who was the first financing for the remote viewing program, because he was very interested in this type of phenomena, and he was the first funder. And so Paul Sperry had downloaded the app, this ESP tester, and he was sitting right beside me at the table, and then decided that he wanted me to do this test. And I really wasn't interested, and he pulled his little cell phone and he poked it in my face and said, "Come on, just give it a try." And I said, "Well, no." And he said, "If you get it right, a little picture will come up. And if you get it wrong, it'll give you a shock." And I said, "Well, I really don't want to have a shock. I don't want to touch your cell phone. I'm not too interested in being shocked. And you just want me to get shocked." And so he kept insisting. And so finally, to calm him down, I touched his stupid phone, and a picture popped up. And then he goes, "Oh, that's cool. Do it again." And I said, "No, I don't want to get shocked. I don't want to." And he kept insisting. So I did it again. And I got two. I had a second photo show up, and now everybody's starting to sort of pay attention. And he said, "Do it again." And I said, "Well, no, I'm ahead of the game. I don't want to do it again. I'm 2 for 2, and it's like going to casino. I'm 100% winner." And he kept insisting. So then I did it again, and boom, another picture. So it was 3 for 3. And now lots of people are watching this whole event take place, and he keeps insisting. And I said, "No, I'm ahead of the game. I really don't want to get a shock." And that was basically the thing. It wasn't that I was trying to get the right target. I was trying to not get the wrong target because I didn't want to be shocked on his stupid phone. And so then it went 4 for 4, and then he was really pushing, and I insisted I wasn't going to. So this took quite a while. And I said, "No, I'm not going to do it again." And it was 5 for 5. And then he said, "Come on, you only got one left. Do it again." And now basically everybody's watching. And finally, after a lot of insisting, I go, "Whatever." And I touched his stupid phone, and it went 6 for 6. So basically, I got 100% on the Russell Targ ESP tester, and I now insist that I'm a super psychic, and I've retired from the game because I hate to be wrong. So I'm not going to do it again. I'm 100%, and I'll always be 100%. So I'm not going to do it again. So that was kind of an interesting event where we're doing this thing, and I think Paula photographed it and sent it to Russell Targ, and it was kind of a thing that happened in the restaurant that night. Now, what I've sort of found is that this aport manifestation phenomena has started to sort of happen around me. And I haven't had many paranormal events in my life, but I have had 2 sort of events at Mount Shasta. The last 2 times I've been to Mount Shasta for the Mission Rama group events, there's been weird stuff happen. The first one, I had this message from the alien that they knew I was coming. And then this last time, I didn't have the event happen to me, but I was able to record all the events that happened around people that were there. There was 34 people that were there, and I wrote a 110-page report on what had happened that weekend. It was very, very active in terms of various things happening. So I've had that luck, and I've also had the last 2 StarworksUSA conferences that I've been at. Very weird stuff happened. Last year was a feather thing that happened. There was, I believe, 15 different events with 10 different witnesses, including myself and my assistant Desta, having a feather fall on Desta's foot a week after the conference when we were in Tucson, Arizona. So it was pretty bizarre to have these go a whole lifetime without any sort of paranormal events, and then suddenly have piles of them happening. And then this year is sort of the big one. This is the event that at StarWorks where my PowerPoint just goes crazy, and that's the story I'm going to tell now. Again, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm using PowerPoint 2016. I have done probably as many PowerPoint presentations as anybody in the UFO field, because basically I do not use the same presentation 2 times in a row. A lot of researchers will show the same presentation for a month, 6 months. They just keep showing the same presentation. I do a different presentation every time I present, no matter where I do. So I'm rebuilding a PowerPoint every time. I know how to build PowerPoint. I'm not stupid. I use 2016. I'm using the latest version, and 2016 is the version that is being used in the conference hall. Here's Nick Pope. He's ready to load his presentation. Denise is at the podium there, and so is Tom Wood. And it was Tom who was helping me load the presentation. And Denise was there. She watched all this weirdness go on that I'm going to show you in a second. And my assistant Desta was there as well while this whole event was taking place. So here Nick Pope is ready to load his presentation. And then I load mine. It didn't work at that point. So later in the evening, I come back and I guess it's maybe 7:15. I get there. They're all leaving at 8 o'clock to go for dinner, and it's time for me to load. And usually the way it works is you take your PowerPoint presentation, you stick the thumb drive into your computer, you go file, export, export to CD, move to folder, link the files, and then it produces this reproduction of the PowerPoint presentation on the thumb drive, complete with all the audios and videos embedded. And that's important when you see what happened here. It embeds everything. It freezes everything on the frames. So if you don't embed your audios and videos, then you'll see this sometimes if people are presenting where their audio doesn't work. That means they, instead of saying, yes, embed the audios, they say, no, don't embed the audios, and the audios will not play. So when you embed it, it embeds it right on the slide so that when you go to that slide, the audio will immediately play in the background. And that's important when you see what actually happened. And what happened was not one different thing. All the things that happened during this PowerPoint presentation are things I had never seen any of them. And there's about 6 different types of things, almost like they didn't do one thing, because if it was just one thing, you'd say, oh, well, this one thing went wrong and all these things happened. These are 6 different types of events that I've never seen in all the PowerPoint that I've done. And I've done PowerPoint for 15 years. I will say I've done as many PowerPoints as anybody. And I'm also for sure the first person I know of that was actually embedding audios and videos into my PowerPoint presentation. So I know what I'm doing. I've done it for a long time, and I have never seen any of the events that happened. And I'll tell you now as we go through what actually happened. My lecture, I think, is what inspired the whole thing. Is my lecture both in Boulder and in Laughlin, Nevada, had a lot to do with aports and manifestations. So these are the type of events that we're talking about. This is a spike that came flying out of the sky in 1939 in Illinois, got embedded. The guy watched it, it landed into his garden. It embedded itself into the garden. It was red hot, and this is a common phenomena with aports. They're extremely hot when they're first found. And so he had to wait for this thing to cool down. Then he got a knife and he pulled this thing out of the ground, and he gave it to his daughter, who brought it to a NASA lab in 1967 in Tucson, Arizona, because that was when NASA was going to the moon. And they did an analysis, and it was also an analysis was done by, I think it was the Nickel Company of America, which showed that this thing was 99% pure nickel, and it was wound around a core of copper. So that's what this object was, and it just appeared. It's an anomalous object that just appears out of nowhere, so it would be called a manifestation, whereas an aport would be something that's in the earth, like a set of keys that is moved from one place to another, or a cup, or a cell phone, or something where it's moved, whereas a manifestation seems to come out of wherever it's coming out of. It's not on this earth. This is a lot of physical mediumship. If you've seen the skull experiments that were done in the 1990s in England, very, very bizarre. And most of this stuff was aport phenomena. The same as if you look at the Skinwalker Ranch material, what you will see is that was all aport material. As much as people want to try to tie it into UFOs, one of the people was Jacques Vallée, who pointed out that Skinwalker Ranch had basically everything except for UFOs. It's all this aport phenomena. And the Defense Intelligence Agency was very interested in this stuff because it involves being able to move matter through walls, make stuff appear or disappear, which would be of tremendous significance if it could be figured out by the U.S. defense industry. So this is a paper that appeared during a seance during the skull experiments, and it just came and made this loud banging noise as it came down onto the table. And it was a newspaper from World War II that was pristine, as if it had just been printed. The paper was correct for the time because during World War II, there were certain elements that weren't used in the paper. They tested the paper. It was paper from World War II. But the weird thing about it was pristine. It was as if it had just been printed. But they put it in a box, and then a couple of weeks later, they pulled it out, and it was as if it had aged. It had the yellow markings around the edge. So within 2 weeks, it had gone almost like it had been around for 70 years. But when they first got it, it had no yellow markings. It was as if it had been printed that same day. Here's an event that took place. And again, this sort of links into my presentation. I gave a presentation on aports in Denmark, and one of the people went home and found a cookie. In later presentations, I'll show this cookie, but end up with this cookie on the counter, a biscuit on the counter of his kitchen, of a brand of biscuits he'd never bought before. And then when he opened the cupboard, this coin was in the cupboard. It's a coin from Thailand, and it's in this Denmark guy's cupboard. And that was, he was very skeptical. He had seen my lecture on aports and had gone home and had his own 2 aports appear the same day. This is somebody else who's seen my aport lectures. These are 3 women in Illinois who were at a Association for Research and Enlightenment conference that was taking place in a suburb of Chicago earlier this year, and all 3 had an aport. One had the aport experience happen at home, where this coin fell where they were at breakfast, and then as these other 2 were doing registration, and 2 of these girls were actually working at the Laughlin conference. So they had these 3 aports all appear within an hour, and they're holding these coins up for me. They're taking this photograph to show me that they had this aport experience happen. Now, I talked to some of them before my lecture, and I said, "Oh, I've got your photograph in my presentation." And they'd never appeared. Now, whether it was pulled by whatever, or whether I just forgot to put it in, I can't be sure. But I was going to show their photograph during this bizarre lecture that went south, and it wasn't in the lecture. As you see, some of them were working at the table at the Laughlin lecture. Here's another example of I guess this would be a manifestation. There's a woman by the name of Paola in the Arizona area who had all sorts of bizarre things happening. This is probably the most bizarre of them all, and that is she comes into her bathroom. She lives by herself, comes into the bathroom, and here's this big pile of dirt sitting in the middle of the bathroom floor. She looks up at the ceiling. There's nothing there, and starts to wonder, how did this dirt get into the middle of my floor? I think it was the same day that she went to a restaurant. She was sitting in a booth, and they discovered that she was sitting on top of another pile of dirt. And there's a photograph, I don't think I have it here, but I have a photograph where she's madly trying to photograph this as the people in the restaurant are trying to clean up this dirt from under her booth. Same type of dirt, very sort of granular with these white pieces of whatever it is, and they're trying to analyze this material. So this is like a manifestation. This is basically what this lecture was about, just weird things appearing and disappearing. This is an experience before I got there. I'd given the lecture in Boulder, and I had gone to a very prominent experiencer in the Colorado area. And I basically asked him, as I do a lot of experiencers, do you ever have stuff appear, disappear, fly around the room? And his answer was, yeah, like all the time. And he gave me a couple of examples. This is one where the keys had disappeared, and they were actually 10 feet up. The ceiling is 10 feet high, and they were hanging from the hook that holds the lamp up on top of the ceiling there. That's where the keys were found. The other one that he talked about, and this is kind of a common thing with aports, is he stated that people would come and their cell phone would disappear. So the one time they were looking for the cell phone, and of course, the way you find the cell phone is you phone it. So they phoned it, and it was started to ring in the freezer. So they opened up the freezer, and there was the cell phone. There are other examples of this, and I'm sure I'm going to find many more. If you look at the Skinwalker Ranch story, you'll see there's a story where the woman that owns the Skinwalker Ranch goes to the bathroom to take a shower. She locks the door, takes in the towel and the brush, and as her shower comes out and the towel and the brush are missing, and she finds the brush later in the freezer. So this is the pattern, and I think what it's all about is if they were to stick it on the say the counter, you'd say, well, I just forgot it on the counter, but nobody's going to say, well, I think I forgot it in the freezer. They put it in very bizarre places to make you know that you did not leave it there. This was put there by some sort of paranormal means. This is a very bizarre one. I talked about this in the Laughlin lecture and also in the Boulder lecture. This is a story almost like the skull experiment. This was done in Great Britain, and this was what was called the Addie group. This is 1989, 5 people around a Ouija board in England, and they were making these aports appear under the table. So they would be talking to the girl. If you see this photograph, Addie claims to be the girl in the top right-hand corner of this photograph. The photograph, from all the analysis I could do, it looks like it was taken about 1910. And so this Addie's a 12-year-old girl who appears on this Ouija board. And they ask her, we'd like to know what you look like. And she said, do you want to know? And it's kind of a long story. They make a couple of things appear, but suddenly she said, top right is me. And then she says, look under, which means look under the table. And they look under the table, and this photograph, which is an actual photograph with singed edges, which is common with aported photographs, appears. And she says top, and then the board says again, top right is me. And the girl who found the photograph underneath the table stated that she has photographs of herself when she was a child that are identical, as if that is her in the top right-hand corner. So these very bizarre things, and you'll also see with this photograph, you'll see that all of the kids in the front, it's all in focus. But if you look at the back wall, you see on the right-hand side that the bricks are very obvious, and the farther you go to the left, the less obvious the bricks become until you get to the far left-hand side, and there are no bricks visible at all. It's like a wall that's made out of sort of mud, which is very peculiar how you could make a photograph with all these different backgrounds and then yet have the front all in focus. So these are examples of aports and manifestations. It's very, very weird phenomena, and that's, I think, what they want. They want you to go, wow, how did this ever appear under the table? How did they ever get this photo to appear? Where did it come from? And it makes you start to wonder, raises consciousness in terms of realizing that the world is much more a strange place than you think it is. It is not a simple nuts and bolts, random, meaningless universe. It is a very unbelievably magnificent universe where all sorts of things are possible. So here's what happens in my presentation. I make this download. I put it onto a thumb drive in my hotel room. I go down on Thursday evening to load it. And basically all you do is you load it. They pull it up on their computer. They put it on the desktop of the computer, and they open it up. And then they ask you, do you have audio and video? Yes. Okay, go to an audio. Let's play the audio. So you'll go through, you'll flip through people will flip through their different slides. I don't normally do that because I know exactly which slide is coming next. And all I do is I go, so I'm basically, they open up the presentation on the desktop, move it from my thumb drive. And as soon as it opens, I realize we got trouble. This is totally messed up. There's something wrong here. So I sort of ignore that for the time being. There's a bunch of photographs that are doubled up, and I immediately start looking for an audio to play so they can test it on the conference audio-visual system. And that's basically all you do is you test your audio, you're happy with the way the presentation looks, and then you take your thumb drive and you go for dinner or go for coffee, and that's all you really do. So I'm looking for an audio, and basically I start looking, and I can't find, there's 4 slides that I'll show you in a second that have the two audios on them, and I can't find these two slides. Now, this kind of stuff happens and can show you how this material does take place, that whatever the phenomena is that may have done this is able to do this kind of stuff. And I'll show you a prior example. This is a meeting that took place in 2013 at a cottage in Pennsylvania. Mark Leon is sitting right beside me there. He's the owner of the cottage. You have Chris Bledsoe and Chris Bledsoe and Peter Robbins is there. The other guy that was there was the famous Tyler D, who's in the book, if you've read the book by Diane Pasolka, American Cosmic. She talks about this Tyler D. He was there and he had already left. The other person that's missing from this photograph is my friend from Winnipeg, Mark Olson, who was actually at this meeting as well. So we were there, and Chris Bledsoe had a deal with Warner Brothers for his very bizarre story that has a lot of sort of aport manifestation type things, orbs, very bizarre things happening around him. And all these sort of business guys were advising Chris Bledsoe on what to put in the contract, what to sign, don't do this, don't do that. And they were giving him this sort of business advice on how to deal with this contract with Warner Brothers. Chris was in contact with the Guardians, if you know his story. 2007 of January, he has this experience with these beings, and these beings actually, according to Chris, sent me a message in about 2014, 2015, a message that said the message is in the music, and that led to me writing a book called Tuned In, the Paranormal World of Music, where I look at the bizarre connection between UFOs and musicians. And the second element of the book was about inspirations in music, where a lot of music comes from dreams. It comes spontaneously to musicians. So these are the beings that Chris was in contact with. When they were doing the Warner Brothers, Mel Gibson was interested in the story. The two scriptwriters, Chad and Carrie Hayes, went to Chris Bledsoe and said, Warner Brothers would like a sign that we should do the movie. And Chris said, yeah, okay, I'll pray. I'll see what I can do. I don't know what to do. And he says his little prayer. And the next day, the tree in the backyard, which had had a UFO ring under it in 2008, suddenly started burning on the inside of the tree. And they hosed it down, soaked the inside, got the fire to go out. Meanwhile, the son is photographing this whole thing with an iPad, the video of this thing burning. It had been raining for 2 days in North Carolina, Fayetteville, where Chris lives. And they got the fire to go out. And the tree's all soaked on the inside. And a couple hours later, it's burning again. And they put it out for a second time, soaked the inside of the tree. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, Chris's wife, Yvonne, once again finds this tree burning in the yard. So it's sort of got the nickname, the burning tree. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the tree. The tree is in perfect shape. It just, the inside of the tree is all burnt out. It has this very bizarre thing. And so when Chris reported back to the scriptwriters what had happened, they said, thanks, that's what we want. And at that point, Warner Brothers decided they were going to do the movie. Mel Gibson had gotten a sign that they should do the movie with this burning tree. So a lot of these bizarre things, which may be like aports and manifestation phenomena, have happened around Chris Bledsoe. I wrote the whole story about Chris Bledsoe. I think I'm the only one to write up his story in a book called Alien Bedtime Stories, where I tell all the bizarre things that happen around Chris Bledsoe. And one of them links into the PowerPoint thing that happened to me. If you go back to the skull experiment in the 1990s in Great Britain, they were able to produce phenomena on film. They would get instructions from what they called like the spirit people that were producing the aport phenomena they were getting. So they're not talking aliens, they're talking sort of dead people and spirits and stuff like that. And they were told to put a roll of film unopened in its canister on the table. And when they opened it up later and processed it, without it ever going in the camera, they would have all sorts of photographs and sort of instructions on what to do on this film. So they were able to do it. But Chris had bought a camera, and he had bought this camera, and it was a high-end, I think it was a German camera. And he had taken a number of photographs on a trip, I think, and then had come back, and there was a UFO, and he had photographed this UFO And as soon as that happened, the camera went crazy. And we called them the melting pictures. So all of the photographs that were taken after that photograph of the UFO all turned out like this. So this is Chris's face, and you can see it's like a melted photo. Here's another one that was taken with that camera. And then the third one is Chris sitting in a couch, and you can see again, you can sort of see him, but you can see it's all sort of melted. I actually went to the camera company, and I sent them the photographs, and I was trying to get them to identify how this could possibly happen. And they kept saying, well, send the camera in, we'll give you a new camera. And I said, well, no, we really don't want to send the camera in. We just want you to explain how could this possibly happen to a digital photograph. And they never did answer the question of what they thought was going on. They just wanted us to send the camera in and to give us a new camera. So this kind of stuff does happen to film. It's like if there are forces out there, they are, by all appearances, able to manipulate film, and as you'll see in a minute, computers to produce whatever they want. As I showed you at the very beginning, the presentation I did last night was all blurred like this, the entire presentation. There was nothing wrong. I was watching it on the screen. There was nothing. But when I looked at replayed the tape back, the whole picture had sort of blurred. And that's why I'm doing this second episode today. And hopefully this turns out proper and doesn't blur like it did last night. Here's some of the things that happened. And as I said, this is not one thing. These are about 6 different types of items that happened that have never happened in any PowerPoint that I've ever seen. Anything I've looked up as to other people having this happen, I've never heard about this or seen it. This is one of the slides. And it's a slide that deals with Gene Houston, who is a sort of a new age person in New York City, was famous for helping Hillary Clinton write the book, Takes a Village. She was supposedly Hillary Clinton's spiritual advisor at one point. And the reason I had her photograph on here is I'm talking about memory, near-death experiences, and the relationship to trauma. So Gene Houston jumps out of a plane at 17 years old. She's parachuting. Her parachute doesn't open, and she's immediately in a near-death experience type environment where she's having a life review. And so the idea was that trauma, even though you're not injured, trauma can cause like this near-death experience thing, that fear, you don't have to be injured to have a near-death experience. That was why. Now, what happened was that this is the original slide, and I had to take this off of a slide from Boulder, because I'd given this part of this presentation in Boulder, because the slide no longer exists in the Laughlin thing. I had, when I downloaded the presentation onto the conference computer, what happened was I realized this whole thing is totally messed up, and I'll show you in a minute some of the things that were messed up, but it was totally messed up. So at that point, they put it onto another computer. They said it was your computer. You've got the problem on your end. And I'm saying, no, I've never seen this before. I've done piles of PowerPoints. I'm not stupid. And I'm just thinking to myself, if I present this presentation, I'm going to look like a total idiot presenting this thing, because it was just a total mess. And so I said, well, no, it's in my computer on my desk in the hotel room. There's nothing wrong with it. And they put it onto another computer behind the screen, a second computer, and it turned out exactly the same way as the first one. So I raced back to my room to load the thing again, to take it off and reload it again and bring it back. Because I just figured at that point there was just something had gone wrong. And if I reload it, I remember I was running out of the room, and I ran into Paola Harris, and she said, it was 7:45. She said, at 8 o'clock, we're going for dinner. Are you coming? And I said, Paula, I got major problems with my presentation. Something very strange has happened. It's all gone crazy, and I need to go and reload it again. She said, well, you know what's happening. And I said, no, Paula, that's not what's happening. No. And I was in denial. I said, no, Paula, it's not. No, it's just something has happened, Paula. I'm just going to reload it. And I said, I probably won't be there at 8 o'clock. I got to go reload this thing. And I go back up onto the stage, and I got to reload this presentation. I go back up to the room to reload this thing, and I look at the presentation on my computer, and it's absolutely perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. So what I decided to do is put a second one. So what I did is I downloaded the second, I wiped everything off the thumb drive, and then I started again. So as you'll see later, we had problems with the video. So I have the first version where I reload the presentation, and then the second version, I reload the version without the audios. And I'll explain in a minute why I took the audios off, because it actually moved, the audios had actually moved to different slides. So I reload it, I go back into the conference room. My assistant Desta is there, and she said, oh, it's okay. They bumped the computer and it all went back to normal. I said, oh, great. So I went back and I got Tom, and we went back up on stage. He turns on the computer, opens up the thing, and it's the same mess as before. So they may have had it fixed for a second, but it went back to crazy. And so what I was going to do after, and that's the presentation I'm doing now, I was going to do a presentation where I would take the presentation from my computer, which was perfect, and I was going to show you what the presentation looked like and then what happened to it later. The problem was that when I went on the Monday to look at the presentation on my computer, that was perfect. It had gone crazy on the Monday. And I thought the presentation on the thumb drive would go back to normal, but it was the other thing. It was the one on the computer. So I really don't have the presentation anymore. I have no version. That's why I had to go back to a version in Boulder, Colorado to get this slide, because it does not exist on any of the Laughlin versions of the presentation. And I made a lot of versions of that presentation. It doesn't exist. So here's what happened. So this is what the original slide was supposed to look like. This is what appeared in the presentation. So what it does, it broke the slide into two different slides. And this is impossible. There's, as far as I know, there's no way that a computer will take your slides and break them in half and put one on the other. So there I have Gene Houston's name on the one slide, I have Gene Houston's picture on the other one, and I have this audio icon where that thing came from, and it appears on there. And so when I saw this, I'm going, what is going on here? Like, why is this, how could this possibly happen? And how could I possibly present this presentation? Because this is like crazy city. I'm going to look like an idiot when I present this thing. So that was the first type of item that happened. Here's another one. Here's another item that was done, which is totally impossible. What this slide was supposed to be was Eric Walker on the one side, that's Dr. Eric Walker from Penn State University. And on the other side, where you have this alien, was supposed to be a photograph of Ben Rich. Now the Ben Rich photograph disappeared. It was not on any part of the presentation. It just simply disappeared. And what they did was take a photo, a slide that I had used dealing with Annette Williamson from Great Britain, who talks about aliens without heads. And this is the whole idea of saying, are we actually dealing with aliens without faces? Are we actually dealing with aliens? Are we dealing with something that can shapeshift or screen image and this sort of thing? So what it had done is taken Annette Williamson's alien without the face, and it had replaced it on the slide where Ben Rich was supposed to be. And the Ben Rich photograph just disappeared. It wasn't anywhere. So it had broken the one slide in half, and this one it had combined two other slides onto the same slide. This is impossible. This does not happen in PowerPoint. There's no way that this would happen. All we're doing is we're moving it from one computer to another, and all these weird things happen. Here's the biggest thing that happened, and this is a third type. This is a completely different type of event. So what we have here is we have all the slides. There was at least 30 or 40 slides like this. So what you have is the normal slide on the left-hand side, and then the slide is duplicated. So you shouldn't have a slide that's duplicated. You should have the slide on the left to be the proper one. What it looks like has happened is the one on the left is a 16:9 widescreen version of the slide, and the one on the right is a 4:3 slide. So when Tom saw that, he said, well, maybe you've moved the slide from another presentation. So a presentation I'm doing in 4:3, I've moved the 4:3 slide over into the 16:9. But that doesn't make any sense, because number one, there are like 30 or 40 slides like this, and I'm going to notice this. This is pretty obvious when you see this in the presentation. This is not something that slipped in there, and I just sort of forgot that I was putting in double slides. So there was at least 30 of these where these slides were sort of in these bizarre things. This is another one. This is Suzanne Chancellor talking about the wheel. This thing appeared on the window of her car, and it's sort of the idea that there's a wheel that we're parsing paranormal phenomena, that there's all these things that link in, and consciousness is in the middle, and there's all these spokes of the wheel of remote viewing, psychic phenomena, near-death experiences, alien abduction, all these kind of things. And so this is the idea of the wheel that I was bringing up, and you can see that one appears to be a 16:9 slide, one appears to be a 3:4 slide that has been moved into the presentation. Here's one that proves that I did not move it from another presentation, move a 4:3 slide, because The Energy Cure is a book by William Bankston, who is the president of the Society for Scientific Exploration, and he wrote a book called The Energy Cure, which is known to be the Cadillac of all energy healing methods. And I was talking about that subject, and I know I did not have The Energy Cure in another presentation, so I had to go to the internet to get a photograph of the book, The Energy Cure. So this was pulled off the internet, and the presentation was being built in 16:9, which would mean that I moved the slide in, and the one on the left is what would appear. That's what happens when you take a background and you put an image off the internet. That's what it looks like. The one on the right could not have existed because I've never had The Energy Cure slide in another presentation where I could get it. And yet the presentation doubled up on the slide and made this bizarre second slide. And as I said, there may be as many as 40 of these double slides. Here's another one. This is Dan Pasolka, who wrote American Cosmic, and this is the famous Tyler D, although I've taken his face off. And they're at the Vatican, looking at the Vatican Library, looking at the secret files in the Vatican Library, and you can see there's the 16:9 slide, and then this really bizarre stretched out slide that was a duplicate. This is the fourth type of thing that they did. And there was only one of these, but this is pretty obvious. If you have a PowerPoint presentation and you suddenly have a slide that's sideways in the presentation, you know you didn't put it in sideways. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you go through your presentation that one of your slides is sideways. This is the guy who was behind the feather incident in 2018. This is Tony Binns. Tony Binns takes a lot of photographs of very low helicopters, 50, 100 feet above his head around the London area, and also to UFO photographs. And he has two of his helicopter photos have UFOs in them. So this is a photograph I'm showing of one of Tony Binns's low-flying helicopters with the UFO in the background. And I can guarantee you I did not put the slide in sideways. But when we put it on the conference computer, it had flipped sideways. Here's another one. This is Tony Binns with orb type things where the photo is sort of stretched out. This is a photo of the provincial archives in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where Stan Freeman's files are. You can see the one is a normal slide showing the archives boxes, storage area, and the other one is a stretched out version of that. Here's one that shows even weirder. So you've got what appears to be a normal slide and then this sort of stretched out slide, but they're not together. So you would say, okay, the computer is making two slides or whatever, which is impossible. It's not going to do that. But this one, you can see it's slide 157, 158, 160. I've taken the one slide out just to show this thing. There's actually two slides between the normal slide and the bizarre slide. So they're not even together. And that was the key. When I started to see the slides weren't together, that these stretched out slides were moved from one place to another, then you really makes your head scratch. And I think that's what they want you to do. One of the things that this is a fifth type of item that happened, is when we opened the presentation, I would immediately look for this, that there was a triple slide, that one of them was triple. And it's like, no, I've done like hundreds of PowerPoints. I don't put in 3 slides and then not recognize the fact I've got 3 slides. And again, you see that there's 2 slides that were in between. So, or actually 3 slides. So it's 1 slide, then 3 slides, and then 2 of the same slide, where you have this triple slide. And every time we would open up, we kept testing this thing on different computers, and I go and reload the version, put it back on. That would be the first thing I'd look for. Is that triple slide still there? And yep, it slipped, and I'd go back up in the room. There'd be no triple slide, come down, load it in the computer, the triple slide would reappear. So this is a bizarre thing where it started to triple the slides. Here's another one where they've taken 1 slide and they've replaced it. They've taken 2 slides and they've moved stuff around. So this is a slide I had on how many brains are there. This is the whole right brain thing that when I discovered this, I contacted Hal Putoff and asked about remote viewing. and said to Hal, in your days, did you ever get into this right brain, left brain thing, that the right brain is picking up the signal, the left brain is creating the noise. If you can shut down the left brain noise, you can pick up the signal in the field, and you can be precognitive, do ESP, all this kind of stuff. And Hal wrote me back and said, read my book, Mind Reach, chapter 6. So what this slide was supposed to be was chapter 6 on the one side, and the book cover on the left-hand side was supposed to be Mind Reach by Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. And that was on the original slide. What it in fact did was take that photograph off the slide and put this other one from Andrew Newberg, who did research on people who do channeling, mediumship, praying, and put them in MRI machines to see what the brain pattern was, and found that there was common brain patterns. If you are all meditators and all, say, remote viewers or all channelers would have the same brain pattern. You could tell what the brain pattern was going to be. So that was the book, but that's not the slide. It was supposed to be Hal Puthoff's book and Russell Targ's book, and it had actually taken one piece off one slide and combine two different slides. Here's another one which shows this idea where there's slides missing in between, and this was the Monday version. So what I had done was I had gone back on the Monday, and I was going to grab the version that was still pristine on my desktop of my computer, and I realized it had changed too. It had gone nutty like the other one. Here's a really bizarre one. In the top left-hand corner, we have Vivaldi, and I'm talking about downloading music. And when I was in Boulder, I was looking at Vivaldi. His name had come up, and I had not done him in my tuned-in book, The Paranormal World of Music. And so I immediately did a Google search to see where Vivaldi got his music. Was it left brain music where he was, practicing and writing music, or was it right brain music where he was sort of getting sort of a download thing? And the slide right beside it is the slide that I produced, which showed that he was able to compose music faster than people could write it down. It was just flowing into his head, and he was able to produce music at an incredible rate. The weird thing about this is you'll see in slide down at the bottom middle, you'll see the same slide is distorted. It's the same slide as above. So it's reproduced this slide, but it's like 6 or 7 slides later, it produces this slide in a bizarre fashion. So you can see this kind of stuff. And this, I can guarantee you, this does not happen in PowerPoint. I've never seen anything like this happen before. Now here's the weirdest part of the whole thing. And this is why I had to do a second version without the audios. So when I first started, you'll see 2 double slides there. Okay, the first one is Raymond Moody on reincarnation. The second one is Sean Webb. And the reason I have 2 slides is the way I do my presentation is I'll put 2 slides in like that. The first one will have nothing on it, and the second slide you'll see has a little audio icon on it. So when that photo comes up, I know we're about to go to the audio. So I set up the audio, and then I click to the next slide. And if you're in the audience, you can't tell I've gone to the next slide because it's exactly the same slide. And the second slide has the audio embedded on it. And that's important to realize. The audio gets embedded on the slide. And that's why it says, do you want to embed your audios and videos? Yes, link everything. So you link it all so it won't move around. When I started the presentation, when I saw all this craziness that was going on, I said, well, let's find the audio. And I'm flipping through very quickly. I'm trying to find this Raymond Moody slide. And it's about 12 slides into the presentation, and I'm looking for it, and I can't find it. And I keep clicking, and I'm going really fast. And then I'll look for this Sean Webb. I knew that I had this one, because what I want to do is test the audio slides. And then Tom says, well, you're going too fast. Slow down. You're going too fast. You probably just missed it. And then I'm thinking, no, it's gone. And then I go back up and I go click, 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 very slow. I'm going through and I'm looking for these 4 slides. They were not in the presentation. They have never been in the presentation since I first loaded it. They had completely disappeared. So I'm going through and I'm saying, it's not here. Where are my audio slides to test the audio? I'm clicking through, and then I come to a point farther down in the presentation, and all of a sudden the audio starts to play. And I'm going, I look, and it's like it's playing. The audio had moved off the Raymond Moody slide, and it moved on to some slide that had nothing to do with Raymond Moody at all. And then I kept clicking again, and the Sean Webb audio had been moved off the Sean Webb thing and moved on to a slide that had nothing to do with Sean Webb. So that was totally impossible for an embedded audio to leave one slide and be placed on another slide. It was just really bizarre. So I'm sort of going to end now with this thing. I'm going to play these two slides because I didn't get to play them in Laughlin, and I'm going to play you these two slides and explain to you what these slides were about. But again, these slides never did appear. They were gone in the Laughlin presentation. And when I did the second version, I took all the audios off because it was perfect on my regular computer. So I took these 4 slides off so that I wouldn't look like an idiot and have these audios play on bizarre slides that had nothing to do with it. So here's the slides. This is Raymond Moody, and he's talking about this phenomena. This is a study that I really want to do about people who have the near-death experience, who have the life reviews. And what you discover when you start looking at these life reviews is that people see the life review not from their perspective, but from the perspective of the person that they're interacting with. So if I made you angry and made you cry, when I have my life review, I get to see this event of my life from your perspective, what it felt like to be on the other side when I said whatever I said to you. So you're seeing it from a second perspective, which indicates that the universe is way more complex than people think it is. Not only is every event recorded, every thought recorded, every connection to every other thought is recorded. So you not only have all your thoughts are recorded, you have all the thoughts of the people that you're interacting with, and those two are connected so that when you have the life review, you see it from a second perspective. That's a pretty complex universe if all the thoughts are connected. And that's this whole oneness concept, that it's all one thing and you can move from one person to another, that all our thoughts are combined. So that's why I wanted to show this slide. And this slide disappeared, but here's Raymond Moody talking about this phenomena, about seeing your life from other people's perspectives.
There is a wonderful man, and his name is Dr. Rajiv Parti, P-A-R-T-I. And Rajiv was chief of anesthesiology at the Bakersfield Heart Hospital in California. And according to Raj's picture of his existence up to this point, he was totally consumed by the material world and competitiveness. And he said his whole purpose in life was to have a bigger house and a fancier car than any of his colleagues. And then he had a very dramatic near-death experience in which he saw his entire life reviewed. One interesting thing that came out of this was that Raj said in his life review, he saw quite a number of interactions that he had had with his patients, and that he was very mechanical in his treatment of his patients and not very warm, and would respond to them rather coldly. But he said that in the life review that he had, he would see the backstory of this, and he would see the suffering that was going on with his patients. And this has transformed him.
And here's the next slide. And this has to do with 40% of all experiencers claim at one point during their experience they needed answers to everything in the universe. And as I pointed out with the wheel before, with the Suzanne Chancellor wheel, this idea that we're parsing everything, that everything is connected. So even though you have 40% of all experiencers who say at one point they knew the answer to everything in the universe, you also have meditators who make the same claim that at one point during their meditation experience, they sort of broke through and were given the answer to everything in the universe. Sean Webb is one of those people. So here's him talking about meditation and getting the answer to everything in the universe, which is why I think it's very important to deal with these people, because it appears that all the information is in a field, and it's not a matter of talent, it's the ability to hack into the field, to figure out how to shut the noise down, to pick up the signal. Everybody can see the signal, and it's a matter of access, of shutting things down rather than turning things on in order to get into this field. So here's Sean Webb describing his experience of knowing everything in the universe. which is very common, as I said, with UFO experiences.
Had this amazing consciousness expansion experience where I went through these experiences, then I became the experiences, then I went through being, following this tour guide, and then I became the tour guide and became the consciousness of the universe, became the creative energy of all of existence, got down below the Planck length to where everything goes infinite, got to take a tour of how all of the universe works, the atoms of the universe, how it comes together, the quantum energy, and how it magically creates all of Newtonian physics and the multiple dimensions that come together that then clash with their waves to create particles, and you got to see chemical reactions occur with the release of heat energy and light energy and all this cool stuff, and then you got to see the whole process of life and how two individual cells come together to create a human body and multiple bodies of insects and all living things, all of this really, really, really cool stuff. And I thought I was dead. And I thought I was, this is what you learn when you die. This is what you learn when you're on your way to heaven. And then you wind up in this space of perfect bliss in the middle of nowhere with absolutely nothing to do but be the universe, which was just amazing. And it was infinite. And it was all knowledgeable, all wise, all loving. And everything that happened, as humans could judge it good or bad, happened and was beautiful. And it simply was as it was.
Now, the last item I'll deal here, I went with Sean Berg, who's a Hollywood actor. He's been fascinated with UFOs since he was a young kid. He did interviews with a number of the speakers, and he and I went out to this labyrinth place just north of the casino strip. And we were wandering around, and the big film crew was filming all this as we wandered around in these stone things. The interesting part about it was, this goes into this whole download thing of now the way I look at things is not so much what idea people have, but where did you get the idea from? And as we were finishing up, this guy appears with a dog. He's walking this dog in around the labyrinth. And there's a bunch of these. He's got about 5 or 6 different sites, huge elements of these rocks all over these hills. And he came along, and so Steve went up to him and said, "Oh, cool, you made this?" And we started talking to this guy. And of course, my first thought was, so how did you get the idea for this? Did it just sort of come to you? And he goes, yeah. And he starts telling me this story about where the idea came to do this massive operation to put all these stones down. And at that point, the producer came up and said, "I hate to be a bad producer, but we got to go. Let's go." And everybody just packed it off, and we left this guy standing there about to tell me the story of where this came. So hopefully I can contact this guy and get the story of where did you get the idea to put this whole thing up, because he seemed to be indicating that it sort of came from somewhere else. So I'm going to leave it at that today. Hopefully this presentation works. I'll hand it off to my assistant Desta, and hopefully this has worked, and we'll do some more presentations on Stanton Friedman coming up. And I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.